The HOA inspector broke into an apartment and was caught by the security system. Shocking images were sent to the police, revealing a shady scheme that shook the entire residential community. A simple alert on a cell phone triggered an investigation. No one expected. A story of courage, technology, and justice that will change your view on privacy. Get ready to be outraged. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you're watching from. You know that feeling like someone has invaded your space? No, I'm not talking about that annoying aunt who shows up unannounced on Sunday. I'm talking about literally finding a stranger rummaging through your drawers. That's right. My dear security system captured the HOA inspector. Yes, him, Mr. Immaculate Suit and Grumpy Face, turning my apartment upside down while I was innocently buying my organic vegetables at the grocery store. Guess what? My system sent everything to the police. And that's when the fun really began. Let me give you some context. My name is Helen, I'm 35, a software engineer, and I work from home. Yes, I'm that antisocial neighbor you rarely see at the building parties. After a divorce that left me with more trauma than I'd care to admit, I moved into the oh-so-refined Spring Gardens condominiums 6 months ago. And by oh-so-refined, I mean a place where gossip travels faster than fiber-optic internet and where the HOA president seems straight out of a dystopian episode of a primetime soap opera. From day one, I felt those stares. You know the ones, right? The ones that scan you from head to toe and seem to say, "Who is this stranger who doesn't attend our lovely meetings about the color of the new curtains for the party room?" But it was fine. I was living my life peacefully, programming my systems during the day and watching cop shows at night. Actually, maybe it was those shows that made me install such a sophisticated security system. Ironic, isn't it? It was a Saturday like any other. The sun was shining outside, the birds were singing, and I had decided to do the most exciting thing of my weekend: buy groceries. There I was, deciding between 2 brands of coffee when my phone buzzed. I thought, must be another useless promotion. But no, it was a notification from my security system. Motion detected in apartment, and along with it, a live video feed. My heart leaped. On the screen, I saw Mr. Robert, our esteemed inspector, opening the drawers in my office as if he were looking for the last piece of chocolate at a kid's birthday party. And it wasn't a mistake. The man was clearly going through my personal documents. Oh my God, he even opened the special box where I keep my family photos. Have you ever felt that mix of outrage, fear, and an absurd desire to teleport and scare someone? Well, that was exactly it. My hand trembled as I pressed the Call Police button on the app. Yes, my security system has that function. Overkill? Maybe. Useful at that moment? Absolutely. I abandoned my shopping right there. Apologies to the employee who had to put everything back on the shelves, and drove back home like I was in an action movie. I think I broke about 3 speed limits, but who cares? There was a man rummaging through my house. When I arrived at the condo, the police were already there. 2 officers, a man and a woman, were waiting for me in the lobby with serious expressions. The doorman, a young law student named Philip, looked utterly confused by the whole situation, and of course surrounding me were several curious neighbors, pretending they were just passing by. "Ms. Helen?" the male officer asked. "We received a call about a breaking and entering." And it was at that moment that the HOA president, Mrs. Jones, the very one who organizes the famous afternoon gossip sessions, where reputations are destroyed between butter cookies, appeared as if by magic. At her side, guess who? Mr. Robert himself, now wearing an expression somewhere between offended and scared. "There's been a huge misunderstanding," Mrs. Jones began, in that melodious voice she always used to announce increases in the HOA fees. "Mr. Robert was just conducting a routine inspection." Routine inspection? Routine inspection? Since when does routine inspection include opening private drawers and messing with my personal computer? "With all due respect, Mrs. Jones," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes, "I don't recall authorizing anyone to enter my apartment in my absence, and I'm absolutely certain I didn't authorize anyone to rummage through my things." That's when Mr. Robert, adjusting his tie as if it gave him more authority, dropped this gem. "We received an anonymous tip about unauthorized structural modifications in your apartment. I am merely fulfilling my duty." Structural modifications in my apartment. The only structural modification I had made was hanging a picture on the wall. "And that justifies looking inside my box of family keepsakes?" I asked, feeling my face flush. "Or checking my computer? Please, explain to me where in the condo bylaws it says the inspector can invade private property without authorization." The neighbors around, no longer even pretending they weren't listening, started whispering. Some looked at me as if I were the villain of the story. Can you imagine? Me, the villain, when it was my apartment that had been invaded. The female officer, who had been observing the scene silently until then, finally intervened. "Let's clarify this situation. Mr. Robert, do you have any document authorizing your entry into Ms. Helen's apartment in her absence?" Mr. Robert swallowed hard. Mrs. Jones quickly jumped in. "As the HOA management, we have the authority to inspect units when there are suspicions of irregularities that could compromise collective safety." "That's not true," said a voice behind me. Everyone turned. It was an elderly woman with white hair and an elegant posture whom I barely knew, Ms. Carmen from Apt 302. "The bylaws clearly specify that any inspection must be scheduled at least 48 hours in advance and with the express consent of the owner, except in cases of emergency like leaks or fires." Absolute silence. Who was this woman and why was she defending me? More importantly, how did she know the bylaws by heart, bylaws that I, honestly, had barely skimmed? Mrs. Jones looked like she had swallowed a lemon. "Carmen, this is none of your business." "Oh, but it is my business when I see administrators abusing their power," Ms. Carmen replied with a sweet smile that hid sharp teeth, "especially when it's not the first time." Wait a minute. Not the first time? What did this woman know that I didn't? The police decided to file a police report. Mr. Robert kept denying any wrongdoing, but the images didn't lie, and I had plenty of images. My security system had captured everything in high definition, including the moment he accessed my computer. That night, alone in my apartment, I felt violated and furious. Who did these people think they were? And why were they so interested in my apartment? I knew I was a bit paranoid. 3 years of post-divorce therapy don't fix everything, you know? But this wasn't paranoia. It was real. Someone had entered my home without permission. I decided to do what I do best: investigate. I spent hours reviewing the recordings frame by frame, and that's when I noticed something strange. Mr. Robert wasn't searching randomly. His movements were methodical, as if he were looking for something specific. He went straight to my office, ignored most rooms, and focused on the drawers where I kept documents. What the heck was he looking for? The next day, the news had already spread throughout the entire condominium. The new woman in Apt 501 called the police on the inspector. Great. Now I was officially the crazy, paranoid lady of the building. People literally changed direction when they saw me in the elevator. One woman even clutched her purse tighter, as if I were going to rob her. Ridiculous. But one person didn't avoid me, Ms. Carmen. In fact, she knocked on my door that afternoon, bringing an orange cake that smelled divine. "I thought you might need an ally," she said, walking in unceremoniously when I opened the door. "And also some sugar. Stressful situations call for sugar." Who was I to disagree? I cut 2 generous slices while she observed my apartment with interest. "Sophisticated security system," she commented, pointing to one of my discreetly installed cameras. "Work in the field?" "Software engineer," I replied. "I actually develop security systems." "Fascinating," she said, smiling. "Knew I picked the right floor to live on. I always say the 3rd floor has the best view, but it seems the 5th floor has the best technology." I laughed, relaxing a bit for the first time since the incident. There was something comforting about this lady. "Why did you defend me yesterday?" I finally asked as she savored her cake. "You don't even know me." Ms. Carmen put down her fork and looked at me seriously. "Because I've seen this movie before, dear. And I didn't like the ending." She then told me that Robert had been married to her niece for 5 years. The marriage ended when the niece discovered he was using his position as a private security guard to obtain information about wealthy people and then blackmail or steal valuable items. My niece found out when she discovered a USB drive with detailed information about the residents of a condominium where he worked, she explained. Habits, schedules, valuables, written down passwords. I felt a chill. "And what happened to him?" "Nothing," she replied bitterly. "My niece was threatened. He said if she reported him, bad things could happen. She was scared and just left the marriage. He kept his immaculate reputation. And now he works here, I murmured, the pieces starting to fall into place. How long has he been at this condominium? About a year. Interestingly, right after the sudden departure of the journalist who lived in your apartment. Wait. What? Journalist? What journalist? Anthony Smith, a discreet man, worked for the city newspaper. He was investigating something about corruption at City Hall, from what I heard. One day, he just announced he needed to move urgently. Left the apartment practically furnished. That's when you bought it, wasn't it? Yes, that was exactly it. The apartment was being sold urgently, furnished, for a price that, thinking about it now, was too good to be true. At the time, I just thought I was lucky. Ms. Carmen, I asked slowly, do you think Robert was looking for something that belonged to that journalist? She smiled like someone saying, finally, you get it. I'm just suggesting that too many coincidences together are rarely just coincidences, my dear. In the following weeks, I became an amateur detective. I started by installing more cameras, now not just inside my apartment, but also in the hallway. I managed to access the condo system. Let's just say cybersecurity isn't their strong suit, and discovered that 2 other single female residents had filed complaints against Robert for unauthorized entries. Both complaints were filed away by Mrs. Jones as misunderstandings. Misunderstandings, huh? How convenient. I also started paying more attention at the HOA meetings. Before, I avoided these meetings like the plague, but now I attended all of them, sitting quietly in the back observing the dynamics between Robert, Mrs. Jones and the HOA board members. It was fascinating and disturbing to see how they manipulated every vote, how they subtly silenced any opposition. At the famous monthly afternoon gossip session, I showed up for the first time. You should have seen the shocked faces. It was as if an alien had landed in the middle of the party. Mrs. Jones almost choked on her own tea when she saw me entering the party room. Helen, what a pleasant surprise, she said, with a smile as phony as a $3 bill. Finally decided to join our little tradition. Couldn't miss the opportunity. To get to know my neighbors better, I replied with an equally fake smile, especially after so much hospitality. The sideways glances and whispers didn't stop throughout the event. I could practically hear the thoughts. There she is, the crazy one who called the police. But I didn't care. I was on a mission. It was during this tea that I met 2 other women who lived alone, and who, surprise, had also had problems with surprise inspections. One of them, Louise from Apt 402, told me in a low voice that she found signs that someone had been through her things, but without concrete proof, she was convinced not to make a fuss, to preserve the harmony of the community. She repeated the exact words Mrs. Jones had used with her, as if my safety was less important than harmony. In the 3rd month after the incident, I made a crucial discovery. Reviewing the recordings, in slow motion, yes, I'm that kind of obsessive nerd, I noticed that Robert had discreetly photographed some of my documents. They weren't important documents, bills, bank statements, but why would he do that? I shared this discovery with Ms. Carmen, who had become my unlikely ally in this investigation. We also recruited Philip, the young doorman and law student, who confessed he had always been suspicious of Robert's activities. He often asks to cover shifts at specific times, always when certain residents are away, Philip revealed. And sometimes I've seen him leaving apartments when no one should have been there. The central question remained, what was Robert looking for in my apartment? And why was he so persistent? Because yes, there were other attempts. My system captured him, passing by my floor repeatedly, discreetly testing if my door was locked. Seriously, the guy wouldn't give up. It was Ms. Carmen who suggested a theory. What if it's related to the journalist's work? Something he left behind? The idea made sense, but I had already turned the apartment upside down when I moved in and found nothing suspicious. Where could something so important be hidden? The answer came in the most unexpected way. During a severe storm that caused a blackout in the entire neighborhood, I went down to check my car in the parking garage. Some residents had reported leaks in the basement, and I was worried. And guess who I found there, standing next to my car, flashlight in hand? That's right, our friend Robert. Checking for leaks? I asked sarcastically, shining my phone's flashlight on him. He jumped, clearly not expecting to find anyone there in the dark. Helen, just doing my rounds. What a coincidence finding you right next to my car, isn't it? Almost as coincidental as finding you inside my apartment months ago. Something in the darkness, the rain pounding outside, the static electricity in the air, or maybe the fact that no one else could hear us, seemed to release something in Robert. His face changed, the mask of professionalism falling away to reveal something more sinister. "Where's the USB drive?" he asked directly, his voice now low and threatening. "What USB drive?" "Don't play dumb. The USB drive the journalist hid. I know it's somewhere in that apartment." "So that was it, a USB drive, but I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't find any USB drive when I moved in." He took a step towards me. Instinctively, I stepped back. "That apartment was clean top to bottom before you moved in. We checked everything, but the USB drive was never found and it has to be there." "Why is it so important?" I asked, trying to buy time while discreetly activating the video recording on my phone. God bless modern smartphones, because it contains proof, he answered without thinking. And then, realizing he had said too much, he composed himself. "Look, this isn't personal, it's just a job. Give me the USB drive and you'll never have problems again. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't give you something I don't have," I replied, my voice firmer than I felt. "And now if you'll excuse me, I'm going to check my car and go back to my apartment." He didn't try to stop me, but his words followed. Me to the elevator. "You don't know who you're dealing with, Helen. Better let sleeping dogs lie." I didn't sleep that night. Robert's words echoed in my head. A USB drive with proof. Proof of what, exactly? And where could it be if even Robert, who had apparently searched the apartment before me, couldn't find it? The next morning, I gathered my investigative squad, Miss Carmen and Philip, to share the new information. "Over-invoicing on the condo renovations," Philip said immediately. "It's been a recurring problem. Last year, they approved a huge special assessment to renovate the facade, but the work done was clearly inferior to what was budgeted." "And who was behind these renovations?" I asked, already guessing the answer. "Mrs. Jones's brother's company," Ms. Carmen replied. "Convenient, isn't it? And the HOA board approved it without question." The pieces of the puzzle started fitting together. An investigative journalist discovers a corruption scheme involving the condominium, gathers evidence on a USB drive. Somehow Robert and Mrs. Jones find out. The journalist flees in a hurry, but not before hiding the USB drive somewhere in the apartment. But where? I spent the following weeks examining every inch of my apartment. Every outlet, every baseboard, every old piece of furniture left by the previous owner. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. In the 6th month of this trashy daytime soap that my life had become, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Jones announced a spring party for the condo, the theme, renewal and transparency. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Philip informed us that during the party, the management office would be empty, as everyone, including Robert, would be busy with the guests. It was our chance to search the management files for evidence of the scheme. The plan was simple. Ms. Carmen would create a distraction in the party room, I would sneak into the management office, and Philip would keep watch. On the day of the party, wearing a floral dress that perfectly concealed a small toolkit, yes, I learned lockpicking. YouTube is a blessing and a curse. I mingled with the guests. The room was decorated with artificial flowers and banners proclaiming Spring Gardens, a transparent community. I almost choked on my punch. Ms. Carmen initiated her well-rehearsed distraction, a dramatic fainting spell that drew everyone's attention, including Mrs. Jones and Robert. While the commotion ensued, I slipped out of the room and headed to the management office. The lock was easier to pick than I expected. Apparently, security wasn't really a priority for people who preached so much about it. Once inside, I went straight to the computer. Luckily, the password wasn't hard to guess. Spring 123. Seriously, people, be more creative. Within minutes, I was browsing the files, looking for anything related to the renovations or the former resident of my apartment. And I found it. Oh my God, I found so much more than I expected. There was an entire folder labeled Special Projects, containing over-invoiced budgets, forged invoices, and emails between Mrs. Jones, Robert, and 2 board members discussing how to divert money from the Condo Reserve Fund. Even worse, there was a subfolder with the names of several residents, mostly elderly and people living alone, with detailed information about their finances, routines, and even health problems. They weren't just stealing from the condo, they were selecting vulnerable targets for some kind of scheme. Quickly, I copied everything I could onto my own USB drive. Ironic, isn't it? And was about to leave when I heard voices approaching. My heart pounded. There was nowhere to hide. Luckily, the voices passed right by the door, continuing down the hall. I took a deep breath, closed everything carefully and left, locking the door behind me. Back at the party, Ms. Carmen had already recovered from her fainting spell, entertaining a group of ladies with stories about her travels in Europe. I naturally joined the conversation, pretending I had never left. Later that night, when I finally returned to my apartment, the adrenaline was still pumping through my veins. I had gotten the proof. Now we could expose the whole scheme. But my joy was short-lived. As I opened the door, I immediately realized someone had been there. It wasn't an obvious mess. Everything was more or less in place. But small details gave away the intrusion. A slightly misaligned book, a drawer not completely closed. I rushed to check my security system. And there it was, Mrs. Jones and Robert searching my apartment together. The scene was surreal. The elegant HOA president in her party dress, wearing gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, methodically opening every drawer, while Robert removed light switch covers from the walls, looking behind them. So they still believed the journalist's USB drive was here, and now they were getting desperate. The next day I gathered my squad again. I showed them what I had found, both the recordings of the new invasion and the files I had copied. "This is much worse than we imagined," Philip said, pale as he examined the documents. "They're not just diverting money from the renovations. They're using privileged information for some kind of targeted scam against the most vulnerable residents, and apparently convinced several seniors to invest their savings in a special maintenance fund," Ms. Carmen added, pointing to a spreadsheet. "This fund doesn't even officially exist." We were facing a moral dilemma. Exposing everything publicly would undoubtedly ruin Mrs. Jones and Robert, but it would also harm many innocent residents, especially the elderly who had invested in the Phantom Fund. And to be honest, I just wanted my peace back. "We have to be strategic," I finally said. "A public expose would create a scandal, but wouldn't necessarily solve the problem for everyone." We decided on a more direct approach. I used my skills to create a detailed dossier with all the evidence. Then we scheduled a private meeting with Mrs. Jones and Robert. You should have seen their faces when they walked into the condo meeting room and found us, me, Ms. Carmen, and Philip, sitting calmly at the table with printed copies of the dossier in front of us. "What is this?" Mrs. Jones asked, her usual authoritative tone now tinged with nervousness. "A necessary conversation," I replied, gesturing to the chairs across from us. "Please, sit down." Robert looked ready to turn around and leave, but Ms. Carmen stopped him with a simple, "I wouldn't do that if I were you, my niece's ex-husband. The police are on their way." She was bluffing, of course, but they didn't know that. "Let's get straight to the point," I said, pushing the folders towards them. "We have proof of everything. The over-invoicing, the diversions, the fake maintenance fund, the files with residents' personal information, everything." Mrs. Jones quickly flipped through the dossier, her face turning from red to white in seconds. Robert remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "And what do you want?" he finally asked. "Money?" I laughed. "No, Robert, we're not like you. What we want is simple. You resign from your positions, return all the diverted money, and never set foot in this condominium again. In return, we won't hand this evidence over to the police." "That's blackmail," Mrs. Jones muttered. "No, this is justice," Ms. Carmen corrected, "and it's far more merciful than you deserve." The negotiation was tense. There were threats, tears, and even a kicked chair. Guess who? Yes, Robert has anger management issues. But in the end, they accepted our terms. The next day, Mrs. Jones called an emergency HOA meeting to announce her resignation for health reasons. Robert had already cleared out his office and disappeared. A transition committee was formed, led to my surprise by Ms. Carmen. In the weeks that followed, I found myself involved in rebuilding the condo administration in a way I never imagined. I used my technical skills to create a transparency portal where all residents could track expenses and decisions. The old withered flowers in the gardens, were replaced the same week the old corrupt practices were eliminated. And what about the famous journalist's USB drive? Well, that's the most ironic part of this whole story. 3 months after everything settled down, I was reorganizing my bookshelf when a heavy volume of Moby Dick, a book I admit I had never opened, fell to the floor. And guess what slipped out from between its pages? A small black USB drive. Curious, isn't it? The object that started this whole mess was hidden in such an obvious place that no one thought to look. A huge book that probably no one in this condominium would ever open. The journalist had a sense of humor, apparently. The USB drive contained exactly what we expected, detailed proof of the corruption scheme, even more extensive than what we had uncovered. But it also contained something else, evidence linking these schemes to important figures at City Hall. The journalist was investigating something much bigger than condo problems. I sent the USB drive anonymously to the local newspaper. 2 months later, a corruption scandal erupted that shook the entire city. Several arrests were made. Robert was among them. Now, a year after the day I received that notification at the grocery store, our condominium is a different place. Meetings are actually about community issues, not about covering up schemes. The security system I installed in the common areas, with everyone's consent, ensures no one has their homes invaded. And me? Well, I finally started attending the condo parties, not because I feel obligated, but because I found a real community. Mies. Carmen became my best friend. Philip finished law school and is now our official legal consultant. And that constant feeling of distrust that had followed me since the divorce. I won't say it's completely gone, but I've learned that not everyone is trying to deceive me. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't installed that paranoid security system, if I hadn't received that notification while choosing between 2 brands of coffee. I'd probably still be living in a condominium controlled by corrupt people, paying special assessments for imaginary renovations and feeling like an outsider. Funny how life works, isn't it? One small electronic device changed everything, and to think my ex-husband used to say I was excessively cautious. Ha! Who's laughing now, honey? Who's laughing now? So, the next time someone calls you paranoid for wanting a security system, show them this video. Because believe me, you never know who might be trying to break into your home while you're innocently buying your organic vegetables. And remember, cameras don't lie. People lie. HOA presidents lie. HOA inspectors definitely lie. But a high-definition recording, that's your best friend. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an HOA meeting to preside over. Yes, I was elected HOA president at the last General Assembly. Who would have thought, right? From outcast to president in just 1 year. Life has an interesting sense of humor. And what about that security system that captured everything? Well, now I offer consulting to other condominiums to implement similar systems. I turned my trauma into a business. I call it turning the tables. And believe me, it's extremely satisfying. So the next time your gut tells you something is wrong, please listen to it. I almost ignored mine, pressured by people who made me feel crazy for being suspicious. If there's one lesson I learned from this whole story, it's that trusting yourself is never an overreaction. And if by chance you're an HOA inspector watching this video and thinking about breaking into someone's apartment, think twice. You never know who might be on the other side of the camera, watching your every move. Oh, and one last thing. Robert, if you're watching this from prison, hope you're enjoying your new digs. I hear the inspections there are quite rigorous. Ironic, isn't it? The inspector getting inspected, life really comes full circle.